Have you ever been listening to your favorite gospel artist and thought, who wrote this anointed worship? And with that question, who wrote the music? And it may not be a surprise to discover just how many blessed worship songs were written by the gifted songwriter, musician, singer, and composer Gordon Jensen. Now, Gordon Jensen's music has been heard with the Gator Homecoming series, such as the DVD Holy Ground video, if you're looking for that in particular, the Jimmy Swaggart Crusades of the 1980s and 1990s, and nearly every other well-known gospel singer, such as Janet Pascal and John Starnes, and a myriad of gospel quartets from past to present. Gordon Jensen's music has been an ongoing blessing with a special, intimate gift that is seldom heard from gospel songwriters nowadays. Songs such as Bigger Than Any Mountain, I Should Have Been Crucified, He's just as close as the mention of his name, Whisper Jesus, Jesus Will Outshine Them All, Redemption Draweth Nigh, Written in Red, and hundreds of others. And I have Gordon here today, and I want to thank you, Gordon, for giving me this opportunity to interview you, if it's not too formal.
Yes, sir, Dan. Good to be with you.
Thank you. And well, I'd like it, Gordon, if you could share with us your personal testimony, and if you could also maybe share how you got started in music.
Okay. Well, I was very blessed to be born into a godly home and family. And what that did is gave me an advantage of time. When I was 6 years old, I literally came to a place of feeling a need of a personal Lord and Savior. And I went to my mother, and she prayed with me that day. And I tell you, I felt like a tremendous weight was lifted off of me, and I had a new joy on the inside. And I'm just a small kid, just a boy. And I can remember skipping down the street, just so happy in God that day. And that's where it started for me. And of course, it went on from there. I was filled with the Holy Spirit when I was 11 years old, and that was a tremendous experience. It was like a personal Pentecost. And I started singing with some cousins of mine. I'm a Canadian. I need to say that. I'm from Windsor, Ontario. That's really Greater Detroit, Michigan. And when I was 8 years old, my family decided to leave Canada, and they moved to the U.S., moved to Mesa, Arizona, in the Phoenix Valley out there. And I lived there till I was 15. But I had some distant cousins that sang together, and three boys, twins and an older brother. And I said, well, you guys need a bass singer and a piano player. So I was like one of the world's highest bass singers at that time. But I did play the piano, and we sang together, not just at our own church, but many other churches in the area. And that was kind of the beginning of working with groups. When I was 15, my family moved back to the Detroit area, but stayed on the U.S. side. And we started attending a wonderful church in Detroit called Brightmore Tabernacle, which was one of the significant churches in establishing Jimmy Swaggart's ministry. And anyway, I met a man at that church named Larry Orrell. And Larry had just moved back to Detroit. He'd been in Dallas for 2 or 3 years. And he wanted to start a group. And I was singing with one of the church groups that night, playing the piano and singing. And so he caught me after the service and said, I want to talk to you about working with me and forming a group. And I did. And it took us a year to find Wayne Hilton. We had a couple other tenor singers that worked with us that first year. But when Wayne joined us, we're ready to go. And I'm writing songs. I'm now in my late teens, And, I'm writing songs beginning about age 16, 17. I wrote Redemption Draweth Nigh when I was 18 years old. And we got a recording deal, first of all, with Zondervan, one of their labels. And then after that, I signed with the Benson Company, John T. Benson Publishing in Nashville. They had Heartwarming Records, Impact Records. And anyway, I was able to make a deal with Bob McKenzie, who was pretty much running things there at that time. And the deal was that if they would record our group, I'd write for them. Well, it made perfect sense because the group would be demoing these songs and putting them out there. And so that's what we did. And I worked with the Benson Company for a few short years. And eventually we disbanded the group somewhere around 1972-3, right in there. And we did not work together as a group, the Orrells, until 1975. And the Benson Company came to us and said, we want you to do another album for us, and we'll publish Gordon's songs and promote them and try to get them arranged for choirs and what have you. I was all for that. And so we did. We did an album called Together Again, and wrote a song just for that called We're Together Again, just praising the Lord. And I can tell you that a lot of churches across America have used that song as a congregational chorus, and still do. So that's where that came from. Well, about that time, the PTL Club came online out of Charlotte, North Carolina, with Jim Baker, and we got invited to come sing on their program, and it became a serious enough thing for us. We were back there every 6 weeks or so, and for a couple of days, and that was an incredible promotion of our music, tremendous. We got many schedulings through that. I remember that we didn't buy a bus at that point. We got rid of a bus years earlier. We were smart enough to do that. But we needed a vehicle because it wasn't just Larry, Wayne, and myself. We had a bass player named Mark Chadwell, and there was Stephen Spear, the son of Ben Spear, who joined us playing 2 or 3 instruments and singing occasionally. And Billy Blackwood, son of James Blackwood, became a drummer for us. And he also plays guitar very well. So that was the group. We had expanded. And so we bought what you essentially would call a bread truck, a step van. And we were able to put a nice interior in there, and we pulled a trailer for our sound equipment and instruments. And we traveled for 3 or 4 years until about 1979 doing that. So I'm at 1979, and then I met a guy who was with the Benson Company named Neil Joseph, and he was a song plugger. I guess that would be the best thing to call him. He'd been with a traveling group out of John Brown University, and very talented guy. And he decided to record an album of me, a solo album, which we did, and 10 songs of mine, and they released that album, and I got immediately a lot of airplay on several of those songs. And so that was a kickstart on my solo career. And then I did an album called Gallery, which was sort of a reprise of 10 of my strongest songs through the years. We did a new production on it. Well, Neil Joseph left the Benson Company and went to Word Inc., uh, running Dayspring Records, and he brought me over there. And I did two albums immediately for Dayspring, and that was a very fortuitous thing for me. Um, I did one further record for Word on their Word Song label, and that pretty much was it. We did custom albums after that, and so I mean that's in a nutshell the way it went, and that brought me into the 1980s, and which was still a long time ago. But I, by this time my songs were like seeds; they had blown around the country, and there were a lot of people recording my songs. I have songs like "I Should Have Been Crucified" and "Jesus Will Outshine Them All," "Redemption All Night." Those songs, "Tears Are a Language," "God Understands." Those songs get recorded every year, several times. There has never been a year that "Redemption Draweth Nigh" wasn't recorded a number of times. So I'm sure you remember the tremendous emphasis on last things that took place in the late 70s, early 80s when Hal Lindsey wrote the book Late Great Planet Earth.
Yes.
And yes, and Larry Norman wrote a song for the contemporary people called "I Wish We'd All Been Ready." And so there was just a lot of emphasis on last things. The Oak Ridge Boys published two of my songs. One was "Redemption Draweth Nigh," and the other one was called "The Coming of the Lord Could Be Today." And the Oak Ridge Boys did "The Coming of the Lord" immediately. But Dwayne Allen, he's always been a good publisher, placed "Redemption Draweth Nigh" with 6 or 8 groups and artists that really took that thing down the road. And then Doug Oldham did a very big recording of it. And a big arranger in choral music took Doug's version. It was Ron Huff is who it was. Took Doug's version and his tracks, created a choir version that absolutely opened up a whole new world, so that choirs everywhere were singing that song, and that was a wonderful thing. Let me tell you. Well, Dan, I could go on and on. If you want to ask any other questions.
No, actually, I do have some other questions though, but I'm really impressed the chronology, everything from the start of your testimony. It's a continuing testimony. All of the
Yes, it is.
All of the years that go on, and even up till now, you mentioned that every year, "Redemption Draweth Nigh," "Tears Are a Language," I believe "I Should Have Been Crucified." These are still being recorded.
Yes, sir.
All the way up here in 2024, in the 21st century, and just there's so much history here, and I think that for those who love gospel music, and who really, this is their meditation, this is their prayer, whichever that is, where it is personal to them though, and has helped them and has been a blessing to them. It continues to be. It hasn't stopped. I mean, and
right.
So that's like I said, it's a very inspiring story, and a lot of times we get to hear the music, but we don't always get the story behind the music. We don't always get the testimony, right. And that's what I think really touches a lot of people, especially when they'll hear this or when they'll read this, is to hear about really how all of these doors open for you. I mean, you're starting off in Canada at first though, and you had you'd gotten saved at a young age, and you got baptized in the Holy Spirit at 11, and then somewhere I think between that it says you'd moved from Windsor down to Mesa, and then from Mesa when you met those cousins at that church group, and they wanted to sing bass, and you were playing piano. Everything just, the doors, just blew open though. So I think that the Lord had called you into commission at a very young age, and still, and you're still going.
Yep, still at it. Now, Larry Orrell uh, just turned 80 years old recently, and he's still traveling and singing. Still sings actually sings better now than he ever has. And uh, it was something to meet him when I was 16, 17 years old, and work with him in establishing the Orrells uh, group. So it was, again, timing, wonderful timing, God's wonderful timing.
Oh man. And I talk with I know I chatted with Larry recently as well too though, and it just seems like anytime there's any memory of what they've worked with in the past or present with gospel music, when that comes up, there are special stories you get out of that you don't always get everywhere else. And Larry, he's gifted at playing piano as well too as singing.
Yes, he is.
Like,
he plays piano also. Yeah.
I see he's still playing piano too. So I wanted to say, Gordon, I've listened to many of the old Orrell trio and the Orrell records, and I noticed that you were writing most of the lyrics and music. And I think you've answered why that was the case. So I think that was when you joined Benson Music, that was part of the deal that they had made there was the music, but you would end up writing.
Sure, that's right.
The lyrics in with that, and so we can hear you on the piano on those records and in the backing vocals, but I guess the question I had here, which you may have answered this as well too, but what caused you to take more of a lead on vocals? Because as you get to like Sunshine, like Gordon Jensen and Sunshine, we're starting
Sunrise, actually.
Sunrise.
Actually, it's all right.
And
that's quite all right.
At about that point in time, then I start hearing a lot of those songs, like Tears, for instance. I think was it Wayne that first sang on that?
Yes, that's true.
And then you have other ones like, I think it was on Gospel Music is the Thing, or The Coming of the Lord, where Larry is singing lead on that. And later on, when these started to be re-recorded with Gordon Jensen and Sunrise, you start to come more into lead. So what kind of caused you to step more into like singing lead as well as like playing piano with the trio?
Well, we would switch back and forth between Larry and I on the lead parts, and either one of us could do the baritone part or the lead part, and so sometimes it was just a matter of deciding who's going to be the featured vocalist on a given song, and I ended up doing a number of them, and again, tonalities of voice. The sound you're getting has a lot to do with all of that, because a song with Larry singing the lead and me doing the baritone part, it sounds quite a bit different from the other way around. And of course, Wayne Hilton, he could do anything, in a higher register that was always beautiful. So that's how we did that.
So there was a lot of alternating going on. So I imagine when you were traveling, there would be cases where you would switch up, like on the vocal parts as well too.
Yeah, and if somebody was having a difficult night, with their voice, we could always improvise that way also.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to hear that, because a lot of Orrells, I mean, so many remember it though, but the records, I'm having trouble finding these digital, and I do know a few people who have collected. They've compiled all of those records together, and we'll get them out there. And if we can, then a lot of that music is going to resurface, so we can get to hear.
Well, that's great. That's great.
I would really love if they could find like more of the live albums that you also recorded as well too, because that's where you sometimes hear those switches.
Well, yeah, we only did one live project, but it was a 2-album package, and the Orrells Live. That's the one we're speaking of. So you got 2 discs. You got at least 20 songs from two discs in that package, but that's the only live one we ever did.
But it'd be great to hear again, and I'm sure we will too. And
Hmm.
any chance we'll see another Orrells reunion sometime in the future?
It's entirely possible. I know that Larry left this week for Europe. He's going to be in Italy and Sicily and Switzerland and places he goes regularly. And I'll be going out in a couple of weeks to New England and up and down the coast in Pennsylvania. And uh, I'll get back from that trip a week before Thanksgiving, and Larry will be getting back. So Wayne and Larry and I have already predetermined that we're going to get together for old time's sake sometime uh, around Thanksgiving, early December, and I'm sure we'll sing a few songs among ourselves. But it's not a recorded event. It's not going to be something that we're going to release to the public.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah,
Something more personal, I think, like that.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
that'd be something nice. I mean, just for you to reconnect there, especially sharing. I know a lot of the stories though, but the wonderful things that God has been working in your lives though, because you're going to
Hmm.
be out here on the East Coast, and I know that Larry had mentioned that to me. I think about Switzerland though, but I know that he does go back and forth to
He
Switzerland
does.
and
Yeah.
Italy a lot. He's
I think he's probably just arriving there about now.
wow, that'd be about like an 8 or 10 hour flight at least. So
Oh, it's a long one. Yeah, all those oceanic flights are long.
mhm. Wow. So, and speaking of some of the songs here, I'm kind of going in different directions here with this, but
Yep, that's fine. That's
songs
fine.
like "Redemption Draweth Nigh," "Tears Are a Language," "I Should Have Been Crucified," "Jesus Will
Hmm.
Outshine Them All." These were getting played quite frequently by the early to mid 1970s, and I don't know if this was
Right.
before the PTO club though. But how old were you when it became clear that your songs were getting picked up and played by some of these major gospel artists, these quartets? And did it surprise you that your songs were having such a widespread impact on the gospel music industry so early on?
Well, yeah, I think it did surprise me, but it was happening going back to the late '60s, early '70s. About the time that we did our live album, uh, there were a lot of gospel groups that were picking these songs up and including them in their programs. Dan, I remember going to, and they called them all night singings, and there were a number of promoters across America that carved out territories, certain cities that they would work 3 or 4 times a year at a certain auditorium, and they built up mailing lists. And so they had a clientele of people that would come to their programs. And, there was a sizable list of gospel artists and groups out there that traveled and sang. And we would sing with like the Blackwood Brothers, the Statesman Quartet, the Rambos, the Spears, the Lefevres, even the Oak Ridge Boys, the Rebels Quartet. We worked with whoever was out there and being promoted at that time. And there was a group called the Galileans, a Hispanic group that picked up Redemption Draweth Nigh, and they took it a good ways down the road. There was an artist back in those days, has gone on to be with the Lord. His name was Sammy Hall, and he was a marvelous singer. I don't know, does that name register with you?
It does a little bit.
Sammy, the Sammy Hall Singers. And boy, they were good. I kind of think of Sammy Hall as a John Denver of gospel music, but he was so good, so talented. And yeah, we had a lot of groups singing those songs. And Larry's dad, his name is Lloyd Orrell, he was a very successful businessman in the car business. And way back, like in the early 1950s, he got involved in promoting gospel sings in like civic auditoriums and places like that. And it developed and got strong. And by the time I met Larry and started working with him, they were promoting what they called all-night singings uh, in 15 Midwestern cities. And they would go in there 4 times a year. And some of the stronger ones, some of the weaker ones were running 1,500 people, but the big ones were running 3,000 to 5,000. Detroit, Chicago, Grand Rapids, South Bend, Indiana, Newcastle, Pennsylvania. These were strong programs that happened regularly, 3 and 4 times a year. And to be booked on those concerts and to be able to present music to those audiences, that was an amazing opportunity. And so God obviously, did that in my life by design. And I didn't understand it at the time. We don't understand often, and except in the rearview mirror, what God was doing and what he was putting together. But anyway, what can I tell you?
Wow, and that's quite a story there. I think there are a few recordings of some of the quartet conventions that were promoted. I don't know if it may have been in Ohio, by Lloyd Orrell back then, that are on YouTube and they're full length though. And I'm not sure who kept the recordings, if those were on like a 33 like RPM or exactly where they came in from. But I've had to listen to that, and so Lloyd Orrell had really he started like all of that, the promoting these larger arenas like that. And I think
Yes, he did.
so. I mean, it's something incredible, of course, to bring. You have Larry there, his son, and you're bringing the Orrells into that to be part of that. So
Right.
you were on a stage. You said it's at times up to 3,000 to 5,000 could be in attendance there. So.
Well, his strongest Ohio cities were Dayton, and occasionally he would promote, up around Akron, that area. But Ohio was always strong. There was another promoter named Simmons, and of course those promoters more or less worked together, who did a lot of Ohio cities as well. And Youngstown, Ohio. I know that he attempted to open up Youngstown. He went to the auditorium in that city. And I remember, I don't know if Larry told you this, Larry was just a kid, 10, 11 years old. And they drove to Youngstown and they were meeting with the manager of the auditorium. And they could hear singing in the background. And Lloyd said, what's going on in the auditorium today? And the manager said, there's a woman who comes in here once a month and does a big, big campaign. Her name is Catherine Kuhlman. And he said, really? He said, I've heard of her, and I've always wanted to meet her. So the manager said, I'll take you backstage and introduce you to her. And he did. They went backstage, and he met Catherine Kuhlman. And Catherine Kuhlman, this was strange, but I understand it in hindsight. She just stood there and looked at Larry head to toe. Just looked at him, and then she started shaking her finger in his face. And she said, you are a very peculiar young man, and it's going to cost you. And then she turned and walked away. And they thought that was strange. But I remember saying to Larry, don't you understand that she was prophesying over you? That's what that was. That was a prophetic word over your life. Now, biblically, the word peculiar, I'm sure you're familiar with word studies and that word peculiar. You're a very peculiar young man, and it's going to cost you. Well, it did cost him. It always costs to serve God, but it costs a lot more not to. And that was a very interesting little episode along the way.
I I wanted to get that last part in there because I thought that was very important, though, when you mentioned the peculiarity of that, event, and then you stated that it was going to cost him, but it's always going to cost more to serve God. It's going to cost more
Then not to.
Not to.
Right.
So that's something very big there, and I know that a lot had changed in there. I don't know the full story though. I'm sure that Larry may share that sometime though as well too, like his testimony though. But that is the truth though, and you hear about that about those who have worked in gospel, about how many things were going on in their life when they started in with the ministry. I remember when I chatted a few years ago with Bobby Crumpler, the son of the tenor of the
Denver Crumpler with the Statesman Quartet way back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bobby had told me about like the night that Denver had passed and how they had completely misdiagnosed. They hadn't caught anything there, and I think Hovey and several others tried to drive out to to see him there. I think he had been at a service the night before, like a Saturday night, and this happened over a Sunday night. They said that he had been throwing up. He was very ill, and when they got into the hospital, I think by the time that Brother Hovey had got there, he had already passed, and at the time they had just written it off as heart attack. They didn't really know what had happened exactly, and I believe Denver was only about 47 years old at that time. But
I believe it was diabetes, basically, the underlying condition.
And so yes, but I love the words in I believe it's in it might be in 1 Samuel. You can probably correct me too if I'm wrong on that. The words from King Saul from King Samuel as he spoke to King Saul, and he said, "To obey is better than sacrifice."
Yes.
And sometimes we're called to obey in our Christian walk in places where we would rather do things by the will of self or the will of flesh, though, but God says go another way, and it's not always comfortable, it's not always easy, it's not always the most affordable or viable route, but God sees ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the old saying, where God guides, he provides, and that's a good little saying. It's better to obey than to sacrifice. That is so true.
Amen. And you'd mentioned this earlier. This was, I think, when Redemption Draweth Nigh, and you mentioned the Oak Ridge Boys had picked up the Coming of the Lord. And so you wrote many songs, Gordon, about the rapture. Like,
I did.
One that I read was, "Will You Be Among the Missing?" Coming of the Lord,
that's right.
And then Redemption Draweth Nigh, which could be, I've stated that one, you wrote the song, so I've listened to the lyrics probably several hundred of times. I said it could also reference maybe the second coming of Christ in certain parts there too, because I can hear where we could be talking during tribulation, unless I was understanding that though. But of those, Redemption Draweth Nigh, as you mentioned, it's still being recorded now.
Right.
And most frequently, it's also one of my wife's favorite songs of yours.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and so, Gordon, I wanted to ask, what inspired Redemption Draweth Nigh? Like, if you remember there, and have you heard you mentioned hearing these choral versions. Have you heard the all choral version that was played in the Mark V, pictures film from 1978, A Distant Thunder?
Oh, yes, of course. I have a copy of A Distant Thunder here at the house, and I was told about that, when it happened, and that was a tremendous thing that was in that film. Well, because the Left Behind series, it was huge back then, and for that song to be sort of the theme song of that was just an awesome thing. Yeah.
Well, the version in the movie. I'll try to find that somewhere. The choir who sung it, I imagine it was more than likely a local Iowa choir, because Russ Doughton Jr., a lot of his film was just right there. It was in the Iowa area, the Des Moines area, and so it's in the credits. I tried looking that up to see, is there a recording? Did these people ever record that? But you can kind of tell from listening to it in the film, it doesn't sound like it was ever studio recorded per se, or maybe it's the quality of the audio for the film, because I believe the audio is mono on the out.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. Yeah.
But a change they made in the arrangement. Now, most of the arrangements that seem to differ from the ones that I've heard that you sing, where it'll usually be you'll have like verse 1 and then verse 2 and then chorus for like the finale, like the final refrain of the song. Whereas like quartets would usually arrange it the way like most songs would go. They would go verse 1 chorus, verse 2 chorus, and then like a second or a half chorus, like, take before, closing out the song. But in the movie A Distant Thunder, they took most of the arrangement where there are major notes being played on the piano or in the actual treble clef, and they moved it all to a minor key.
Yeah, I thought that was effective. That was a very effective way to arrange the song.
And so, what had inspired that particular song? Was it everything that was going around at that time, or was there something else?
Yeah. No, that was the tremendous emphasis on last things at that time. And, of course, I heard the message my entire life, heard it at church constantly. Every time an evangelist came through, they would always preach on the second coming. And I know that there are people out there have great theological differences, of opinion about the coming of the Lord. And but that's fine. But I thought Redemption Draweth Nigh sort of pulled them all together.
Well, it does, though. When I've played that, I've been asked several times, my wife will ask me if we're going to do a study in the Word, if it's about rapture, about second coming. They like that will always come up, and I said, well, second coming, I said as well too, because I said when you wrote the chorus of those words, I said it's almost like I said it starts at the rapture, and then when you get to there's war and strife on every hand. When you get to this part, it sounds like we're talking about like the 7-year tribulation period. And the events that are going on there, and some people doubt that he'll ever come again. If you always think about those, like the saints that were there, and then also the remnant which Christ is coming back for. But when it concludes, the word by God is true, he'll redeem his chosen few, so don't lose hope. Soon Christ Jesus will descend. And so that tells me he's coming back, and that's more of like a second coming type of
well, I've always understood it that, the rapture is Christ coming for his church, and the second coming is Christ returning with his bride, That's always how it was presented to me as I was coming up. And I find that to be a good way to look at it.
And that's I believe that too. I know I agree with you too, Gordon. I know there's a lot of controversy on that. Some will say pre, mid, or post tribulation.
I know.
I've kind of stuck with Donnie Swaggart. He has a saying on that. He said, if as long as you're saved, you're born again. He's like, and we differ on that. He's like, the only thing that matters is that you do believe there's a rapture. He's like, even if you don't agree on when the timing is exactly. That's
well, you're going to go whenever God plans it on his schedule. We're not deciding any of that.
Well, that was even in the second verse of The Coming of the Lord, the song there, because that was when I tried to transcribe it, I had that line of the song written incorrectly, and you corrected it, and it said, but nobody seems to know the very day. So I think that goes to that as well.
No one seems to know the very day,
So there we go.
That's right.
And did that first appear on Gospel Music Is the Thing on that album?
I think it did, yes. I think so.
And Gordon, kind of switching some gears, who are some of the gospel songwriters and musicians or groups that had inspired or continue to inspire you to keep writing and to keep sharing your music?
Well, there have been so many great, wonderful writers. I mean, going back into the history of the church, but even, Fanny Crosby, for instance, amazing stuff. And who was the guy that worked with D.L. Moody? Um, I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, but he was pretty awesome. But then there were writers like Ira Stanfel, great, great gospel songwriter. Uh, Mosey Lister is another one, great writer. Albert E. Brumley was a very influential and strong writer. He wrote "I'll Fly Away." A few years ago, "I'll Fly Away" was the second most recorded song in music history, only topped by the Beatles' song "Yesterday." I don't know if you were aware of that.
I was not.
But yeah, that's right. Yep. But there were, I'm sorry, go ahead. There were a lot of other great writers. Lanny Wolfe is one. Even people like Dallas Holm. And we mentioned Larry Norman in the contemporary field. Nancy Honeytree is another one. Great writers.
Yeah, they're incredible. For the sake though, I'll look that up afterward. The one who'd worked with Dwight Moody, because D.L. Moody I know had worked in several, and it's interesting because before I made this call today, I've been listening to several of the albums there, and I had the Sunshine. I don't know if it was the first Gordon Jensen and Sunrise album, and I was listening to Coronation Day. And is that you?
Okay.
Is that you that's doing the narration there? Just quoting D.L. Moody?
Yeah. In fact, and of course, that is the story behind the song. I read the life story of D.L. Moody, and when he passed on, are you personally familiar with that story?
I haven't read it for years. I'd have to hear it again.
Yeah. He was not a real old man. I think he was in his late 60s, and he was up around Pittsfield, Massachusetts, that area. But he was in bed with a failing heart, and his family was gathered around him, and there came a moment when he said, "Earth recedes and heaven opens before me. If this is death, it's sweet. There is no valley here. God is calling and I must go. It is beautiful." And a short time later, he'd gone to be with the Lord. So, he said, "This is my triumph. This is my coronation day." Those were his words. And that's where I got that song.
So left a testimony all the way into the last words on this earth. It's something incredible.
Yep, that's right.
And that a lot of these that I listen to, I keep thinking, if they don't make a comeback, I'm just going to keep learning every one of them individually, because that's actually what my birthday's coming up in a few weeks, and I asked my wife. I said, I have not recorded gospel music myself. I did nothing produced or really distributed much out there, just in-house recording. And I said, there's a lot of folks out there and a lot of places now that want to air the old gospel music online, but I said, I'm not a writer. I said, but I love to play gospel music. And I said, and every other song they'll catch that. My wife will be, "That's another Gordon Jensen song?" And like, yes. She's like, I'm surprised. She's like, "How does he come up with all of that?" And he said, "Well, he wrote some of these." I said, "Some time back." I said, "That's the thing." I said, "They're all." I used to, when I first got saved, I was listening to some of the early Jimmy Swaggart Crusades, and they used to play "Congratulations Are in Order."
Oh, that's right. They did. They at the end of their altar call, they would do that song. Yeah, that's right.
You wrote that as well?
I
And
did.
so that was,
Congratulations are in order. Yeah.
and Jimmy also had an album. He has not re-released this, but it's out there on record. It's still fairly easy to find in a record store. But it was the title of the album was Jesus Will Outshine Them All. So
Yep, that's right.
I think as a result, after he recorded it, then he had the Crusade band where after Janet Pascal had I don't know if she had left the Neelons first and then joined up with him, and then later John
Yeah,
Starnes.
I think that's how it happened.
But
And of course, John Starnes was a pilot. I'm sure you knew that.
mhm.
And uh, Janet Pascal put the song written in red. Her version of it is the one that really, really got played everywhere, and was such a blessing to that song.
Did did Janet add the bridge in there? There's a bridge in it, and I played it recently, and I did this too, but I didn't find it in the original, which was
Nothing but the blood of
yeah.
Jesus. Yes, yes, that's right.
That was very beautiful. So I think that was kind of
Yeah.
something tradition there. And I read that about Janet and John that before they would go out there, they had a day or so before every crusade where they would go in and they would practice. Sometimes they'd end up writing something the day prior and
Uh-huh.
run it by Jimmy Swaggart and the musicians. And so there were a lot of your songs that get picked up there. I know one that she sung in the Crusades a lot was "He's Just as Close as the Mention of His Name," and that's a very
Yep.
different arrangement as well too. Um,
Yep.
so
That's right. She did.
and you know we mentioned this too though, like how you'd gotten all of this everything was going on the way it was in the 60s and 70s, how things had just started to really pick things up for you, Gordon, and everyone
Hmm.
around you though, and open these doors, and then on to the 80s. And that's the part where when I'm reading a lot of times where it doesn't get touched on maybe as much though, but I wanted to say that's that it's been a real big part, I think, to my music learning here as well too, um,
Hmm.
because when there was a previous interview, like I mentioned earlier in this call, where someone had asked about some of the music, and a lot of the songs that are the most commonly played I think a few have asked you about those, and we have some of the stories in there, but there were so many of those in the 80s. It's like I probably wouldn't be able to list them all now though, but it's like one by one. It's like I'll listen to one again and I'll pick that out. So those albums that were recorded during that time, and I think you mentioned that was when what was the label? Because I wrote it down too here, but um,
Was it Impact?
it may have been.
Or,
Which
uh,
which was the first you recorded in the 80s? Was it Just in Time?
that was on Dayspring, Word Dayspring label. Just in Time, that was the first of those. And the next one was called Fighting the Fight. And but Just in Time, yeah, that was with Neil Joseph over at Dayspring Records.
So yeah,
Yeah,
those hold a special place in my heart. Just in Time, Fighting the Fight, Tuesdays and Thursdays,
yeah,
Songs for the Road,
yeah.
um, and actually, interestingly enough, when I sit down, I have a Hammond organ here. It's not a B3. It
Hmm.
sounds like a Farfisa. It's a real basic Hammond, but
Hmm.
I played back in January. My wife was on her way to Dresden, Germany, and I was at work that week. So before she went in, I was thinking of songs in there, and I was like, we're always under that spiritual warfare. And the title track from that album, Fighting the Fight, came to heart. And so I practiced it on piano, but when I went to play it
Hmm.
in our small service there, I went to play it on the organ, and sometimes I'd get looks there if I get on the organ though to play it though, but it still came
Yeah.
out. It still did.
Okay.
So,
All right.
um, the
Good.
glove, the album, the glove, I believe I've heard. It sounds like two different versions of that. Were there two like separate like versions, like one that's more like where you have more vocals, or was that something in producing where they changed something with it?
Yeah. What I did, is I took the Sunrise masters and went in the studio and I re-recorded it for a solo album. That's what I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love both of them because they're. I think I don't
Hmm.
know if the re-recording. Well, it might have Happy Wheels returning on that, but
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. That's on the Glove album I did. Yeah.
but there are a few I think that alternate where I think Wayne is singing a lot of the lead, and then the version that Apple Music someone uploaded to there, and that's the version where you're actually singing. I believe lead on all the tracks, so which I really enjoy that, especially "Don't Go to Heaven Alone." That's just you and Larry. I think
Yeah.
I don't think anyone can really sing that like you. I want to find out where Larry recorded that because there's a performance that I had shared a while back that was from like a broadcast where Jake Hess said, "Let's hear Larry Norman, sing 'Don't Go to Heaven Alone.'" There's him.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I've seen that clip. I sure have. Yeah. Uh, Don't Go to Heaven Alone was really most promoted by Henry and Hazel Slaughter with the Gaithers. When Bill started doing his concerts, it was, Bill, Gloria, and Gary McSpadden, and it was Henry and Hazel, and it was Doug Oldham. That was a package, and I think they ran that package for at least 3 years. And every time they'd come back to town, the crowd would almost double, and that's how he built the thing up. Yeah, but Don't Go to Heaven Alone. That they're the ones who really put it out there for me.
Wow. And when you
Yeah.
were there at the homecoming friends gathering, I've got that DVD, and
Hmm.
I don't believe it's in print, but there are still copies of it where people can buy these. I think small bookstores still have this.
Hmm. Right.
And so Doug Oldham was there. So you would have seen him there. And I believe, I don't know if Henry and Hazel, were they also there as well, too? I believe they did sing a song at that
Yeah.
time. Look through.
You know, Henry only passed away about 2 years ago. He was way up in his 90s and attended a church nearby where we would often attend if I was in town. Um, but I saw Henry quite a number of times and visited a lot with him. And he never lost it, even though he was that advanced in age. He could still make that piano work.
Wow. What a blessing,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
I've noticed that with pianists though too, those who have that gift, like especially with the Holy Ghost, when they as they
yeah.
get older, my grandmother, she just passed at almost hit 104 last year. She was
Wow.
born August 3rd, 1919, and she
Mm-hmm.
wasn't playing that time. She had been bedridden the last 4 years of her life. But when I last saw her in Illinois back in 2016, she'd still sit down with me and she'd say, "Dan, you come over. You're going to do the bass clef. I'm going to do the treble," because that's what she was used to, was alternating between
Okay.
that. But I've noticed that with a lot of gospel pianists. I think when like Hovey Lister, for instance, was by the time he knew that was it lymphoma that he had passed from, but
I think that may be correct. Yeah.
and he knew at that time because Bill Gaither had interviewed him a few weeks prior, and he went out and continued to come to the homecoming gatherings, and he'd go in and he'd play the
Right.
piano, and it'd be like the illness. It wasn't there when he sat down at that piano. Like I said, that with gospel pianists,
Yep.
it's just like I think Lauren Matthews said this recently. It was I think at the last time he played piano right before Jimmy Ruth had passed, and he mentioned something about
Hmm.
like ringing the bells to heaven. And that's the way I think of that.
Yeah.
When every time a gospel pianist sits down, that's what it's like when they sit down at those keys.
Well, there's Lauren. There's another Canadian.
And I don't know the story on that yet, though. I didn't get much time to talk to him before everything that had happened, though. But
Yeah.
it's great to see him, and had him in prayers a lot of that. Well, recently and everything like that with that, and I'm glad the family there's so much support there. Um,
Yeah.
going with them. And
Yeah.
switching gears here, Gordon, a close friend of yours recently, and this Larry, he shared with me the inspiring story behind the writing of the song "I Should Have Been Crucified." And so, for those who
Okay.
would be reading or listening to this, could you share the story of how God gave you the
Oh,
words
sure.
to "I Should Have Been Crucified"?
Be happy to do that. Somebody gave me a book, a paperback book, when I was a young teenager. It was the life story of Billy Sunday. Now, Billy Sunday, of course, was a great American evangelist uh, a few generations ago. He never preached outside the United States, but boy, he had powerful crusades in this country. They would have to build special tabernacles, and he would come in for long periods of time and preach, and great crowds would come. I was just at the Billy Graham Library a few days ago last week, and Billy Graham, Billy Sunday. There were a lot of Billies that preached the gospel. But anyway, the story is that there was a man who was a businessman who helped underwrite a lot of the Billy Sunday crusades, particularly in his later ministry. But the man should have died during the Civil War in this country. This man in question he was very young. I mean, I think he was in his late teens in the Civil War years. But he was a member of a group called Quantrell's Raiders. Quantrell's Raiders. And Civil War buffs could tell you about that. Anyway, they would slip up over the Mason-Dixon line and raid small towns using guerrilla warfare tactics. And they were very successful for 3.5 years. Well, one night they staged a raid just inside the Iowa border, coming up over the Missouri border, and there had been a tip to the Union military that this was going to happen, and so the soldiers in blue had the advantage this time, and they had set a net, and they captured all but one of Quantrell's band, at least that group, and the teenage boy I mentioned had managed to evade capture, but he stayed nearby, and he was aware of the proceedings, that his comrades, had been pulled into a hasty military trial, found guilty, and sentenced to die by firing squad the next morning. Well, the next day, his comrades were brought out and lined up, and a firing squad took its place. And just before the fatal order could be given, that young man rushed out of hiding and startled the whole proceeding, ran up to the commanding officer and said, "Wait just a minute, sir. I think you should know that I'm one of them, but you didn't bring me here. I came here by my own choice." And he pointed to a man in the line. He said, "That man's my friend. He's got a wife and children. I've got nobody. And sir, I'd like to take his place if you'll let him go." Well, the commanding officer had the power to make that decision. And he said, "Young man, if that's what you want, that's what we'll do." He thought it was a noble gesture. And so the boy walked over to the line, and a man walked out of the line. And just moments later, it was done. The shots had been fired, and a number of lifeless bodies were lying on the ground. In that number, one who shouldn't have been, not in that number, one who should have been. But the young man whose life was spared, at the end of that war, went into business and found he had great ability and really became a wealthy man. And most important, he found the Lord Jesus Christ, his Savior, shortly after that war. And years later, he had a beautiful monument placed on the grave of that boy. And he wrote this inscription: "Sacred to the memory of Willie Lee. He took my place in the line. He died for me." And that's probably the most beautiful picture I've come across of what it is Jesus has done for every one of us than that. I mean, he took our place in the line. Still have that little paperback book. Some guy named Ellis wrote it, and it's probably still available out there. You'd have to go on, line and do a search. You can probably still find that book. But that's the story behind I Should Have Been Crucified.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
history that, I mean, I know Civil War buffs, they know some of these stories, but not everyone knows that or will associate it with gospel music history. That this is something that has
Right.
inspired that music. A lot of people singing this, and of course, we don't think of the numerous testimonies. It's just like with the early church. I've heard we'll talk about the early church martyrs, though, but I'll ask them, I say, do you mean from the New Testament or those who had died like during the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th centuries? I said, the list of martyrs and the testimonies, I said, it really continues to this day. And
Yeah, that's right.
So I said that was something when Larry shared that with me, I was like, oh, that's incredible, because I think Larry said that he just saw you were reading the book over there on the bus, and I kind of think the ideas
Yep.
were coming in at that time, though. So I think it's a really great blessing this evening to hear that story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Gordon, your music, it's opened many doors to ministry globally. Could you tell me a bit more about your ministry and how that too has been touching lives around the world?
Well, I've traveled extensively in the United States. I've held concerts or meetings in every state except Utah, and I've also never visited Hawaii. I've been in all the other states. Been to Alaska 3 times, but I travel mostly in the U.S., but I've done several trips to Africa. I've done 2 month-long trips to South Africa. I've done 3 trips to Nigeria. I had a great uncle that was a missionary in Nigeria years ago in the 1950s. And I spent a month in India in 2005. And spent several days in France, in the Paris area, on the way to Chennai, India. And we worked in other cities in India as well. But that was a tremendous experience. We saw so many unusual things happen. And I pray for the sick, and I see a lot of tremendous healing miracles happen for people. And I go into churches with my music that don't necessarily believe in those kind of things, There are denominational churches that just don't have pockets for the miraculous in this day and time. But I can still go in and share my music and see lives touched, and I do. But sometimes I go to churches where they're wide open to the power of God, and spiritual gifts will operate, and I see people healed. I've seen blind eyes open, deaf ears hear, people walk who couldn't walk, a whole long list of diseases healed in people's bodies. So, that's part of the gospel of the Great Commission. They shall lay hands on the sick and they shall recover. I was healed of respiratory illness when I was 13 and 14 before my family left Arizona. I'd struggled with respiratory problems for 3 to 5 years, and Oral Roberts came to Phoenix and pitched his tent at the fairgrounds, and my parents supported his ministry. They said, we're going to take you and have you prayed for. Well, my dad was working long hours. It was a 10-day crusade, but we were at that crusade every night. And I remember the second to the last night of that tent meeting, I said to my father, I said, there's no point in us coming back, because they had a system where people signed up to be prayed for, and they gave them a number and a letter. Well, I could tell that mine was too far down the line. It was not going to get called. And my dad said, no, we're going back. And we did. And that night, after Orrell finished his message, um, his associate evangelist, a guy named Bob DeWeese, got up and said, "Tonight, Brother Roberts is going to lay his hands on everybody who hasn't been prayed for yet." And he said, "The only thing we ask is that you do not engage Brother Roberts in conversation." And so what they did, Dan, they tied ropes from pole to pole to pole in that huge tent. I'm sure you've seen pictures of that tent. Yeah, seated 12,000 people. It was amazing. There were a number of evangelists that had tents about that size because there were no auditoriums that size in that day. Most of the auditoriums were, 2 to 5,000 people. But the only way you could do big crowds was outdoors or in a huge tent. So anyway, they tied these ropes from pole to pole, and they said, "If you haven't been prayed for yet, get up in tight formation along these ropes." And so I stood there for, I guess, most of a half an hour, and finally here comes Orrell, laying his hands on people. His suit is wet with perspiration. 2 men are holding him up, and he comes by, lays his hands on me, and he's praying in another language, and then he moves on to the next person, and he's gone. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Aren't there supposed to be like heavenly fireworks or an angelic orchestra or something like that? I didn't feel anything, but I can tell you this. That condition never returned to me after that night. I was healed of it. And it's not surprising, that he himself was healed of respiratory disease. You may know that. But anyway, God genuinely, powerfully healed me of that. I never had any more pneumonia or asthma or bronchitis after that. It was gone. So I'm grateful and thanking God for that. So that's what happened there.
And these are stories. They're from that time though. Like again, I mean, it makes you wonder though too, like how many of these stories, especially with the Oral Roberts, the early tent revivals that he was having, that had come along though. I mean, and it says something though too though. I mean that. You mentioned the 2 men holding him up, though, that he was very serious. He was going to.
Oh,
He's like
absolutely.
everyone who has not been prayed for at that time. And your dad had said,
Yeah.
"We're going back," and.
Yeah, that's right. He was calling the shots. And that I was just too young, to be able to have a perspective on it like I should. But that's what happened. And I got healed. And I have prayed for a lot of sick people and seen a lot of people healed. But I've been writing a book for several years, and about 22 or 3 chapters. The title I've got is The Unmistakable Voice of God. And the book is established with a publisher in Florida. It's paid for, but I haven't finished the last verse or the last chapter. They told me that we think you need one last chapter to wrap it all together. So I'm working on that now. And so that book will come out hopefully while I'm still in the land of the living. But that's another thing that will happen.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I will get that book out.
I'll be looking forward to that, and I have a long list of others who will be looking forward to that. But what we'll do in respect of publishers, it's like we'll wait till that's ready for release, though, and then if they're able to release the physical and even ebooks, like copies of that as well, too, though. The more ways to distribute it, globally. I know out here a lot of things. Once they're in English, I'm living abroad for 8 years now in Mexico, so a lot of things will make it to Spanish, or you'll have a bilingual like Bible or book where it'll be the English and the Spanish side by side, and those are a little harder to find. But, a lot of that is my wife or myself. One of us will put those together. Or we'll have the things go bilingual like that.
or you could just simply release it in Spanish, just like the English version. Uh, you can release it in other languages too, Spanish, French, German, whatever. And so I expect we'll eventually move it into some other languages.
I was going to say, if the rapture happens before that, Gordon, and we're not
Yeah.
here, just make sure you leave like a bookmark or some place marker in there. That way, when they find that book, those who were left behind, they find that book, they're like, I know where to go to read. Leave a Bible close by, and they'll pick that up, and they'll be like, and they'll have when they do get to glory, or when they get to see us in the new heaven and new earth, whichever that is. Um,
Right. Right.
there will be some additional congratulations in order in that day. So, Gordon,
Yeah.
I wanted to thank you for the time, to really uplift and to
Yes, sir.
bless, many with this background and the history of your music and how it came to be, of your ministries
Hmm.
and of the songwriting, the experience though that you've shared within your life, and how this has touched others though, and how you too have been touched and blessed in this time. And
Right. Yes.
without Jesus, our testimonies, and in your case, the ability to travel and share the music and ministry with the world, it's not just written down in our finite history on this earth, but I believe that your music is written in heaven as part of your living epistle.
Yes.
That God bless you.
Yes,
And
sir.
for those reading and listening, please feel free to reach out to Gordon. It's like, we'll try to get a web page link up here soon and some information about his
Yep.
international ministry. And likewise, if you don't own any of the recordings, a lot of that music right now is available now on Spotify, but I will say more so, I've seen the albums complete, including some remasters of the albums on Apple Music, though. Those of you who
Okay.
have the records, though, I wouldn't trade those in, though. But it's if you happen to have a mobile device or you're flying somewhere or traveling, to and about, though, I know that the music you can find them there. Just if you type in Gordon Jensen, it'll come up. Just take a look
Hmm.
under the list of albums, and I believe Apple Music, they have about 11 or so of the albums that are listed right now.
Wow.
So
Okay.
I would encourage that.
Very good.
And there we go. And thank you as well, Gordon. Here, I really appreciate this. This has been just such a blessing this evening.
Yes.
I can't say enough.
Well, Dan, I'm glad to do this and glad it worked out. And today was the day. And we'll just see where it all goes in the future. Okay.
Yes.